Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's Jewish National Fund USA Leadership Development Seminar, Who Will Write Our History. Welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. My name is Liza Adler, and I'm proud to serve as the Jewish National Fund USA Campus Fellow at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So first, I want to explain a little bit why this program is so important to me. So I am the granddaughter of two Holocaust survivors. My Oma was from Romania and my Opa was from Berlin. And I'm also the grandniece of an Auschwitz survivor. My grandfather's sister married an Auschwitz survivor. And my whole life, I've felt extremely passionate and compelled to learn as much as I could about the Holocaust. But it was not until my Oma passed away that I finally decided that this was somewhat of my life mission and this is what I want to do with my life. And because when my Oma passed away in February of 2019, I not only felt the loss of my Oma, but I felt the loss of yet another Holocaust survivor. And I just can't imagine a world where people won't know what the Holocaust is. And especially now with all the anti-Semitism that is going around, I want to combat it. I want to be the one to change history and to preserve history. So now a little bit about the Jewish National Fund. Jewish National Fund USA offers incredible travel opportunities for college students. And I invite you to join me this summer in Israel on Jewish National Fund USA's alternative winter break. You love Israel and you can't wait to go back and you want to do something amazing this summer and you also want to volunteer, then this is the project for you. The trip is open to young adults ages 18 to 24. It's round-trip airfare from New York City to Israel. Meals and accommodations are included, and participants are responsible for raising a minimum of $1,150 from at least 5 donors. So I encourage you all to join me this Israel by registering today at jnf.org/break. And now I want to make a plug for JNF's Caravan for Democracy student leadership mission, which is a 10-day fully subsidized educational program for student leaders beyond the Jewish faith who have never been to Israel before. This unique mission provides students with the opportunity to explore the Jewish and democratic country of Israel through meetings with political, cultural, and community leaders from diverse backgrounds and faiths. Ideal candidates are American students who hold leadership positions in student organizations, including but not limited to government, ethnic and minority groups, LGBTQ groups, women's groups, service groups, and Greek life, who will be sophomores or juniors at the time of travel. And to learn more and to nominate student leaders, go to jnf.org/caravan, and that's the website for that. So now I want to introduce you all to who our speaker is tonight. I had the pleasure of getting to meet her on Monday, and you are all in for a treat getting to learn about her story. So our featured speaker tonight is Roberta Grossman. She's an award-winning filmmaker with a passion for history and social justice. Roberta Grossman has written, directed, and produced more than 40 hours of film and television. And what sets her films apart are high production values, beautiful cinematic craftsmanship, and inspiring protagonists. Grossman's films tell stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the name of justice. According to Grossman, making a documentary is life-pushing Sisyphus, rock of a sleep mountain. The only way to submit is to have a sense of personal responsibility to tell the story that would otherwise remain untold. Grossman wrote, produced, and directed Who Will Write Our History about Manuel Ringelblum and the Secret Archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, co-produced by ART and NDR. Also, in 2018, Grossman co-directed and produced the Netflix original documentary, Seeing Allred, about women's rights attorney Gloria Allred. Seeing Allred premiered in competition at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and was described as remarkably engaging by the New York Times, utterly fascinating by CNET, and the perfect companion to the #MeToo movement from Variety. Grossman is currently producing All This Life, The Many Words of Roman Vishanak. In 2014, Grossman directed Above and Beyond for producer Nancy Spielberg about the American Jewish World War II pilots who volunteered for Fight to Israel in the 1948 war. That film won the Audience Award at more than 20 film festivals worldwide. Grossman's 2012 Hava Nagila, the movie, which used the song as a portal into 150 years of Jewish history, cultural, and spirituality, was the opening or closing night film at more than 30 film festivals. Blessed is the Match, The Life and Death of Hannah Shenesh, Grossman's 2008 film, was shortlisted for an Academy Award, won audience awards at 13 film festivals, aired on PBS/Independent Lens, and was nominated for a Primetime Emmy. Grossman also produced Dorothea Lange, Grab a Hunk of Lightning, which aired on PBS/American Masters in 2014, and executive produced On the Map in 2016 for director Danny Menken. Grossman was the series producer and co-writer of 500 Nations, the 8-hour CBS series on Native Americans hosted by Kevin Costner. Her film Homeland, 4 Portraits of a Native Action, aired on PBS in 2005. She's also the co-founder with Lisa Thomas of the nonprofit production company Cathodin Productions. She's a 3-time recipient of grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and is a panelist of the WGA Documentary Screenplay Awards. She's a Phi Beta Kappa at the University of California at Berkeley with a degree in honors in history, and she received an MA in film from the American Film Institution. So now to kind of begin the program more so, there will be time for Q&A. So if you have questions for a speaker, I ask that you please type them in the chat at the end. And without further ado, I present to you Roberta Grossman.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, so my first question for you is just, how did you get started doing all of this? You have won so many awards and done so many amazing documentaries. What was the start? What was your passion for this?
For Who Will Write Our History?
Yeah, or just in general.
Well, I'll talk about Who Will Write Our History. I was working on another documentary, just developing it, that took place between the 2 world wars in Warsaw, which at the time was really the center of the Jewish world. And I read a review of Sam Kassow's book, Who Will Write Our History. Sam is a professor at Trinity. And I started reading Sam's book, and I realized that this was the most important unknown story of the Holocaust, at least in my opinion. I mean, it wasn't unknown to scholars, to historians, and with Sam's book, it became more widely known, but I wanted to make a film that would popularize the story so that it would reach millions of people around the world. I just really think that Emanuel Ringelblum is a stellar figure, and he and what he accomplished in the Onyx Shabbos archive should be really well known. And so I wanted to help contribute to bringing him and the Onyx Shabbos archive into the light.
Yeah, I'm so thankful you did. I have prided myself in studying Holocaust studies since the age of 7, 8. I remember the first Holocaust book I read was The Devil's Arithmetic, and I had no idea about this story at all until I was given this opportunity to interview you. So thank you for producing this documentary. It's incredibly important. So my next question is, who were the actors within the documentary? Because I noticed that they spoke pretty well Yiddish. So
yeah, well, the dramatizations in the film were shot in Poland. I had a Polish production company as a partner. They're called Match and Spark, and they were really fantastic. And the casting director that they hired found these really wonderful Polish actors, and they were very, very committed to telling the story of Emanuel Ringelblum in the archive. And that included learning their lines in Yiddish. I mean, the people, Ringelblum and his compatriots in the archive, they went very easily back and forth between Polish and Yiddish, sometimes Hebrew, other languages. And so I wanted that feel in the film. But they were actively, literally believed in that speaking Yiddish was the right thing to do. And what language you spoke for a Jew in interwar Poland said a lot about your politics. If you spoke Hebrew or wrote in Hebrew, that meant you were a Zionist. If you spoke in Yiddish, it might mean that you were a leftist or a Bundist who believed in the revolution of the workers, Jews among them, and didn't intend to go to Palestine. Then there was many combinations and variations on that theme. But Ringelblum and Rachel Auerbach, who's the narrator of the film, they really loved Yiddish and the Yiddish language, and they made a commitment to write and speak in Yiddish.
I have another question about the Yiddish. I know in the film you mentioned that Ringelblum originally started his diaries in Yiddish and then he switched to Hebrew. Do you want to explain why that switch was important to include?
Yeah, well, it was actually Abraham Lewin, who was one of the members of the Onik Shabbos archive, who was keeping a daily diary, who made that switch. And his diary, it was published in English under the title A Cup of Tears. And his diary is one of the most powerful things I've ever read, if anybody's interested in reading it. He was writing all the time in the ghetto, including his wife was deported to Treblinka. And even on that day, he was reporting on what she was wearing, why he didn't go after her, his feelings of guilt that he didn't go after her. So it's this in the moment, very powerful testimony about what was going on. Very, very different than survivor testimony. And in the film, the scholar David Roskis suggests a couple reasons why he may have changed from Yiddish to Hebrew, or he may have been writing in Polish to Hebrew, I'm not sure. David Roskis suggests that one, Lewin was afraid that there'd be no Yiddish speakers left, which is not far from the truth. And so he wanted to write in this more sort of eternal Jewish language. Two, he may have seen his life in this more sort of from a greater distance as being part of the Jewish story, and Hebrew, because of the Bible is written in Hebrew, and Jews pray in the Hebrew language. He may have made that change because he felt that kind of solemnity about what was going on. I guess we'll never really know.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So why did you choose to mix the real footage with the actors, and where is the real footage from?
Okay, that's a pretty big, there's two big questions.
Two questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I think I can handle it. I chose to use actors and do dramatizations because the writing in the Onik Shabbos archive is so powerful, so fantastic, and there's no visuals to live up to it, to meet it. And I wanted the film to really have like the gravitas, the seriousness of a documentary with archival material and scholars, but also to have the engagement and emotional pull of a dramatic feature. So I just decided to combine the two. And that's why I did that. And the footage, we have a lot of footage of the Warsaw Ghetto and photographs as well, because Germans, rather Nazis, were doing a lot of photographing in the ghetto. It was almost like going to like an African safari and shooting exotic animals. They had created this incredibly awful environment of starvation, death, degradation, disease. And then they filmed the people in the situation that they had created, and then blamed them for it. So in other words, it was part of Nazi propaganda to show, look how dirty the Jews are. Look how they're carriers of typhus. Look how they don't care for one another. And there's a wonderful film, a documentary called A Film Unfinished, that's about this archival footage that was shot in the ghetto by a propaganda unit. And you can see things, for example, like a woman carrying a bundle in the street. She walks by camera and she seemingly uncaringly walks over a dead man in the street. And so the impression is, wow, these Jews don't care about each other. They don't, look at how they don't care about one another. But then you see that take two, take three, take four. Somebody was directing her to do this, and she becomes increasingly terrified. And there's a lot of footage like that. And that film, A Film Unfinished, talks about this. It's a great film. So I chose to use that footage because I felt like I could make good decisions about what to use and what not to use. And that's what we have. And it's the real people in the real time. And it's, pretty visceral images of the Warsaw Ghetto. And, when I use material that was just really atmospheric, or the streets, or life in the streets, not overtly propagandistic, I just used it as archival footage. But when I felt it was overtly propagandistic, I put a lower third on the screen that said Nazi propaganda footage. So, there's some ethical decisions to be made about when and how to use that kind of footage, but I feel perfectly fine to use that footage because it's what we have.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, that was what the Nazis were doing. They were videoing everything just because they were laughing at it. It's interesting. Sorry.
In part, it was a form of humiliation.
Yeah, it's interesting that you referenced the other movie because that was a scene that you had actually in the documentary of the guy tripping over a dead body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that comes from the writing. I didn't make up in the dramatizations, I didn't make anything up. Anything that you see a dramatization of and the words that are spoken came from the writing of the archive. So in that case, it was this great piece of writing called Chronicle of a Single Day, and where this writer is talking about, going through the day trying to deal with his hunger. And he talks about tripping over this dead body because he was looking at a storefront or he's, with bread in it. So that's not from the footage, that's from his writing. Lieb Goldman, Chronicle of a Single Day.
That's even more powerful that then they also had that in a propaganda. That's just
well, I mean, the fact of the matter was there was dead bodies lying everywhere because the Jewish, funeral service or whatever couldn't keep up with it. People were just dying, dropping like flies from typhus, from hunger.
Yeah. So my next question is, you mentioned that only, I think it was 2 people from the Oneg Shabbos group survived. So who found the archives and how did they survive? Do you know?
Sure. So it was 3 people from the archive out of 60 who survived. One of them was a man named Hirsch Wasser. Ringelblum was running a very sophisticated research institute in the depths of hell, right? I mean, they met on Saturdays. They had an executive committee that met on Saturdays. They gave assignments. They, wrote lists of questions that they had and handed them to people as an assignment. And Hirsch Wasser and Ringelblum's other executive secretary were the only 2 people who knew where the archive was hidden. There were 3 separate caches. And Hirsch Wasser survived really by, I don't know, miracle, really. I mean, he was deported to Treblinka and he jumped off the train and he survived the jump. And he and his wife, Bluma, who was also part of the archive, were hiding on the Aryan side of Warsaw in 1944 during the Warsaw Uprising, not the Ghetto Uprising. The Gestapo found their hiding place and there was basically a shootout. And Wasser and his wife were the only ones who survived that shootout. So, if he hadn't survived, we might never have found the archive. And after the war, it was really Rachel Auerbach, who's the narrator of my film and who was a member of the Oneg Shabbos, really pressed. We have to find the archive. We have to find the archive, because you have to imagine that, all of Warsaw is in rubble. People are homeless, and for a time, the Russians, when they came into Warsaw, they basically kicked the population out, and people only came back later. There wasn't a lot of resources, wasn't a lot of interest on the part of the Polish government or now the Soviet government to find the archive. And for survivors, the handful of survivors, they were just trying to grapple with their losses and deal with their medical conditions and figure out how they were going to go on with their lives. So it was Rachel Auerbach who was single-mindedly pressing, we have to find the archive, we have to find the archive. And finally, in 46, so only a year after the war, but 3 years after the first cache was buried, she was able to and Hirsch Wasser get together enough resources, and they hired a Polish architect or excavator, whatever, and they were able to locate where they knew the building where it was hidden would have been using old maps and one standing spire of a church. They did these kind of charts. And they found the first cache of the archive. I think it was nine boxes. So it really was Rachel Auerbach's persistence that led to that.
Wow. And in the film, you mentioned they found 2 of them, but what happened to the third one?
So the second one was in milk cans and everything was preserved inside it much better than in the boxes, because milk cans have that kind of seal. If you've ever used like a mason jar or something, it has that kind of seal. It's airtight and watertight. And that was found by Polish construction workers in 1950. They were just building new apartment buildings on the site of the former ghetto, and they hit the milk cans and found it that way. And the third cache was never found. We know it was buried where the Chinese embassy is today in Warsaw. And about 10 years ago, an Israeli team of architects and historians received permission from the Chinese government to dig for 6 weeks, and they did, but they didn't really find anything.
Oh, wow.
And chances are that it won't be found.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask if the audience can type some questions for Roberta Grossman in the chat, and we'll go through them. What is your next project going to be?
Well, I'm working on a couple of things. I'm developing a film about Abraham Joshua Heschel with his daughter, Susanna Heschel, who's a scholar at Dartmouth, head of the Jewish Studies Department at Dartmouth. I'm also producing a film about Roman Vishniak, a famous photographer who went around Eastern Europe right before the war, and his photographs became sort of emblematic of the lost world of Eastern European Jewry. I'm also helping to launch a new fund called Jewish Story Partners that's going to provide grants for films on Jewish themes.
Do you have any suggestions for someone that wants to get into the field of Holocaust studies and Holocaust research? Like, do you have any suggestions on how to go about it or where to start?
Well, I'm not a Holocaust scholar.
Yeah.
I would assume I would just apply to, the very best program I could and get a master's or a PhD. Read a lot. There's a lot of books. And especially now, there's so many lectures by scholars online. Yeah, just the usual path.
That's fair. That makes sense. So one of the questions is, why was this narrative so important to tell?
First of all, the Onyx Shabbos archive, when just the material that was unearthed is like 60,000 pages of documents. So it's the most comprehensive archive by far, created by Jews about their experiences from the Holocaust. As I said, I think I said before, most of what we know about the Holocaust comes from survivor testimony, as well as initially from German documents. But this kind of in the moment eyewitness testimony is critical for understanding the Jewish experience in the Holocaust. And the Warsaw Ghetto was not a stop on the way to death. It was a community that existed for at least 3 years, more than 3 years, the ghetto itself. And in that ghetto, people lived, right? I mean, and they tried to preserve their humanity. And the archive captures all that. Schools for children, secret religious gatherings, concerts, plays, writing of poetry, painting, journalism, literary evenings. It was really quite remarkable. And I felt that Ringo Bloom wanted so much for the truths to survive, even if he didn't. And the members of the Onyx Shabbos shared that idea. I mean, the way I think of it, the analogy that I think of is that when I pass away, I don't want the person who hates me most to give the eulogy at my funeral. And I think Ringo Bloom really, really didn't want the story of Jews during the war to be told by the Germans if they, God forbid, if they succeeded in their genocide and won the war. They wanted the story to be told from their own point of view, and they wanted to be remembered as individuals. That's really terribly important. And I think they had some hope that when the archive was found, that it would prevent future genocides, that the world would be so shocked that this would never happen again. So I feel like that the making the film was really important because I wanted people to hear the story and know the story. And my experience with showing the film to audiences in the flesh was that I realized after the first or second screening that people who were watching the film and the audience were having a interactive relationship with the members of the Onyx Shabbos archive, because they were fulfilling their wishes, right? By watching the film, they were hearing the story from the Jewish point of view, and they were coming to know these people as individuals, and they would remember them. So that was really important to me. And one other thing is, Ringo Bloom cared so much about the truth that he was willing to die for it. And after the last 4 years of the last administration that we lived through, where lies, big and small, became, just the order of the day, I feel like it's really, really important for us to remember that truth is very important. And without truth, we lose our humanity, we lose democracy, and it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. Where are the contents of the archive now?
So they're at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. That's where they've been since they came out of the ground. And they've done a wonderful job. I mean, preserving the archive and studying it and archiving it. And they have published, I think it's 12 volumes of the entire archive in Polish, and now some books are coming out in English. Everything's online, mostly accessible through certain institutions like Yad Vashem or the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum. And they were behind the Iron Curtain, so it really was one of the reasons why the story wasn't that known, is because when was the fall of the Berlin Wall? It was at 84 or 89, but it wasn't until then that really Western scholars had full access to this material, and the translation and the digitizing, also the technology had to be there to really spread the information.
So one of the questions from the chat is, it was amazing that the members of the Onyx Shabbat archive thought to document their experiences. Do you know of other times in history that Jews did the same?
Well, they call Jews the people of the book, right? So I think we've been scribbling for a long time. And everywhere that Jews were during the Holocaust, there was writing, diaries, wherever there was a piece of paper and a writing implement, Jews were writing during the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, recently, I think it was at Auschwitz, a glass bottle was found with notes from the Sonderkommando, the people who were charged with disposing of the bodies that came, after the gas chamber, they were killed in gas chamber, bringing them to the crematoria or burying them in pits. They had the worst possible job. And so that was, quite a find. But there's nothing quite like the Onyx Shabbos archive. There was a smaller archive in the Lodz ghetto, the Łódź ghetto. And that, very valuable as well. But other periods of history, I don't know a time when Jews weren't writing their history.
So another question is, what is your main goal when you go about creating a documentary? What goes into your decision to select a particular topic?
Well, I thought about this a lot, because films take a really long time. The Who Will Write Our History took 8 years.
Wow.
So it's a really big commitment. So it's a serious decision. I think for me, it's the feeling that a big motivator for me is the feeling that if I don't do this, it won't get done, or if I don't tell the story, it will be lost, which is egotistical of me, but it's motivating. Or it's a story that I think is so important, so incredible, that I want people to hear it. Making a film is telling a story. So it's a story that I have an urge to make. A lot of times anger is a great motivation. Angry at some injustice, or the fact that somebody like Ringo Bloom is not well known. Anger is really good. And I guess some kind of hope, and that storytelling can make an impact too.
I think it can. I'm very passionate about telling my Omen Opus stories. So
right? Yeah, you should.
It's two people, but it's two people that are no longer here. So their stories need to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great motivation. Love is also a great motivation, as much as anger.
Yeah. Well, they go hand in hand a little bit.
Yeah.
Both very intense emotions.
Yeah, true.
So another question is, have Shoah survivors, watch your documentary? And if so, what did they think? And Sorry, cut you off. Anyone that survived the Warsaw Ghetto seen it specifically?
Yes. I did a screening in New York with the Claims Conference on Material Claims Against Germany that have been helped support the film. They gave money to the film, and they were really supportive in the release of the film. And we did a panel in New York, and there was a woman who was there, a survivor from the Warsaw Ghetto, and she did me the great honor of telling me she thought it was very accurate.
Oh, wow.
Another powerful experience I've had in terms of survivors is not a lot of survivors have seen the film, but the most powerful reactions come from children of survivors, second generation, and many of them have come up to me all around the world after screenings and said one of the two things: either my mom, my dad, they never talked about their experiences in the Holocaust, or my mom and dad, they never stopped talking about their experiences in the Holocaust. It doesn't seem to be anything in between.
Yeah.
And especially for those, for both of them, many people told me that they felt that watching the film was the first time they really understood something of the visceral experience that their parents, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was lucky to grow up with my grandparents that spoke about it, and a great uncle that is an Auschwitz survivor and spoke about his experience. But I know so many people have not had that opportunity, and I think just based off of my experience, watching your documentary is the closest you're going to get to seeing what it was like.
It's because the film is told through the words of the members of the Onyx Shabbos, the people in the ghetto. It's not looking back from a great distance. It's in the moment.
I know, it's fantastic. I think you did a fantastic job, honestly. So another comment is Poland/Warsaw is synonymous to the Holocaust, but was obviously not independent a few short years ago. Among those who studied the subject, was the Soviet Union considered an obstacle to the education of the public? It seems the field has only reached maturity after 1991.
That's such a great question. The thing that the Soviet Union did around the Holocaust is that they didn't want to acknowledge the Jews as a special class of Nazi victims. I mean, obviously, it was a war against the Jews, and many others were affected as well. We know Roma, gypsies, gay people, disabled people, political opponents. There was a lot of suffering to go around. But in the Soviet Union, they just really, really did a number on not acknowledging the special nature of the Jewish genocide. So that was an obstacle in the Soviet Union, yeah.
Okay, so another question is, are there Holocaust stories that have not been told at all? And what are some obscure events that you've learned about that you feel like should be brought to film? So two very separate questions.
Yeah, they're related. So I've been, like you, I've been obsessed with the Holocaust since I was little. Obviously, that's longer than you. But even my closest friends, when I make these films, I've made other films that either about or touch on the Holocaust. The reaction is something like, eye rolling and, oh God, not another film about the Holocaust. And my reaction is, oh, I didn't realize there'd been 6 million Holocaust films, right? Because everybody has a story, like your grandparents. Everybody has a story. In terms of what specific stories I think are left to be told, there's a new book out right now that is about women in the resistance during the Holocaust, Jewish women in the resistance. I think that the role that women's lives haven't been much examined. There was a women's concentration camp called Ravensbrück, and I think that that's an interesting subject. That's all I come up with right this second.
Yeah, that is a really interesting subject. I didn't know. So were you the daughter of survivors, or how did your Holocaust passion start?
When I was growing up, the Holocaust was American Jewish identity for non-religious Jews. And Israel, of course, and the two are seen in relation to one another. I just started reading about the Holocaust when I was very young, 10, 11, 12, maybe younger, I don't know. And I just couldn't look away. I just have continued reading for the rest of my life. No, but when I've been to Auschwitz, there's one room in Auschwitz that has these massive books that hang from the ceiling, and lots of them they've tried to record the names of, as many victims as they can. I don't know if they've gotten to 6 million, but they have a lot. And so when I look up my last name Grossman or my mother's maiden name Novak, there are pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of people with that last name who perished. But we didn't have, an aunt who was writing asking for help, or, that my grandparents knew, because my grandparents came in the, before World War One to the United States, all four grandparents. So I'm sure we have relatives who perished, but no close relatives that I'm aware of.
You just felt pulled to it.
Correct. Those cartoons of those big magnets, it was like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, that's how I grew up also. I remember, again, what I said before, the first Holocaust book I read was The Devil's Arithmetic in 3rd or 4th grade. And since then, I've been pulled to it. When growing up, I used to have nightmares that I was in the Holocaust and that I was in a gas chamber, and still have them not as frequently, but that was a huge part in who I was growing up. I identified fully with being the granddaughter of survivors and the trauma that comes with being the granddaughter of a survivor, which a lot of people
trauma, I mean, there's studies now, I'm sure you're aware of them, that it's actually something that can be physically inherited, that the trauma is in our makeup, is in our DNA.
Yeah, well, I'm living proof of that, so it's always interesting. So another question is, how can we watch your films?
This film or my films in general?
I think both. Specifically this one first.
I think that your organization has provided the link, no, to people?
For this one.
Yeah, for this one. The other films are available on Amazon, through Amazon Prime, iTunes. Seeing All Red is on Netflix. Yeah, well, if you Google them, you'll find them.
So you're everywhere now.
No, I don't know about that, but they're available.
What have international audiences thought of your documentaries?
The international audience response has been fantastic. The film, we had in 2019, I think it was, we had an international screening, a simultaneous screening on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and which is the 27th of January, which commemorates the day Auschwitz was liberated. And we did it with UNESCO and the World Jewish Congress, and we were at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, and we had Facebook Live component. And then there were simultaneous screenings, I think in 55 countries, 16 languages, and many in Europe and other places. So on that day alone, there were 55 screenings in Poland, and I think the same amount in Italy. So the film was broadcast in Germany and France. So there's been a strong response.
Can I give you a suggestion for our next documentary?
Please go ahead.
About the Italian Jewish people.
Yeah.
I think that's a story that's very untold.
Yeah, actually, I was there. The film played at the Rome Film Festival, and I spent some time with a really remarkable woman who is the head of the organized Italian Jewish communities, and was learning about the Italian Jewish story a bit. And I mean, there has been some. The Garden of the Finzi Contini is a famous old movie that's essentially about the Italian Holocaust, or about Italian Jews. But yeah, go for it.
That could be an interesting line. All right. So now we're at the end, actually. So thank you so much, Roberta, for transporting us inside the ghetto and the lives of these courageous resistance fighters, and for answering our questions so thoughtfully. Tonight's closing speaker is Dr. Bob Benzen, Vice President of the Speakers Bureau for Jewish National Fund USA. Dr. Benedin has been a proud and tireless champion of Jewish National Fund works for decades, serving the organization in a variety of positions. He's currently a member of MACR, which is JNF's ambassador group, and on the national board and has served on his local New Jersey chapter. He's been on 13 JNF missions, chairing 7 of them. Dr. Benedin has a private practice in periodontics and implant dentistry and is a clinical professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Dental School. Thank you, Bob, for making tonight's possible.
Thank you, Liza and Roberta. Just like it is our responsibility to tell the story of the exodus from Egypt, as we did just last week, so too it is our responsibility to never forget and retell the stories of the Shoah. I am proud that the Education Department of the Jewish National Fund presented this powerful program to you tonight and our future generation of leaders. My connection to the Shoah goes quite a circuitous route. As a teen, I was involved in USY, which is the Jewish version of CYO. We had programs that discussed the Shoah. In college, I was at Hillel, and we had programs there. I met with Simon Wiesenthal. I heard Elie Wiesel speak. But my real understanding of the Shoah came when I married my wife of 42 years, Pamela. Her father escaped work camp and served in the Czech army. Her mother survived Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Then 5 years ago, my cousin and her son from Israel were visiting, and Ziv introduced me to my lost family. I knew that my great-grandfather Wolf was a successful Polish Jewish merchant. He had 3 children with his first wife, my grandfather included. She died very young and he remarried. I thought he had 3 more children with his second wife, one of them my cousin's grandmother. It turns out there were 9 more. Wow. My grandfather was brought out of the Tsar's army and emigrated to the United States at age 16 in 1906. And he lost touch with the rest of the family. So this was my reintroduction. 5 of my great aunts and uncles perished in the Shoah, 2 of them in the Warsaw Ghetto. So Yom HaShoah and Roberta's Who Will Tell Our Story has deep personal meaning. It was the story of my family too. Which leads us to Jewish National Fund in Israel. It was JNF that purchased the land that would become the modern state of Israel long before the United Nations partition plan. This land is the insurance policy that Jews will have a place to. Many of you will be traveling this Israel to see firsthand the heritage sites that tell the story of the founding of the state. From Atlit detention camp, where some of the survivors of the Shoah were held by the British prior to entering Israel as Jews returning home, to the Ayalon Institute, where millions of bullets were manufactured under the noses of the British, without which the War of Independence might very well have been lost. Things older than 200 years are antiquities and are supported by the government, but the modern Israeli historical sites are preserved through the work of Jewish National Fund. The breadth and depth of JNF's work in Israel is so extensive, I could speak for hours on each of our action areas. From research to community development to special needs to education, JNF truly makes the lives of the Israeli people better. Being involved in this endeavor is being involved in something much bigger than me. I am part of Jewish peoplehood, the grand experiment of a Jewish homeland that was absent for 2,000 years. This is why it is so important to me. But why for you as college students? Some of you will be the future leaders of JNF, and some of you will be leaders on your campus with an understanding to help combat BDS and anti-Semitism. Over the years, I've met with many of the Caravan participants, and they've become true Israel advocates. You can't not when you see this wondrous country the size of New Jersey that Mark Twain described as a barren wasteland that has become an economic, cultural, agricultural, scientific, medical powerhouse in a mere 73 years. So be moved by tonight's program in the history of the Shoah, and be motivated and join our movement to build and strengthen the land of Israel that is the only socially liberal democracy in the Middle East. Support Israel on your campus and in your conversations. Know that JNF will be there to help you in any way as you navigate these challenges of campus life. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to many years of your engagement in the future of Jewish National Fund. Please reach out to me or Nelson if we can help you help us in any way. Have a good evening and a restful weekend.